When you say, here we go. All right. Welcome everybody to our Family Coalition's LGBTQ inclusive puberty and sex education panel. We're joined today with some really incredible guests who will be on our panel. But before that, I just want to talk a little bit about our Family Coalition and what we do. If you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit that is based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we serve LGBTQ families and children. We've been around for about 20, 25 years, depending on when you're looking at the beginning of our organization. And in that time, we've developed different supportive services, anything from how to start a family if you are LGBTQ, how to care for a teenager once they hit that age where they stop listening to all the things that you were saying, how do you talk to schools about issues that you have with regards to being an LGBTQ family? Lots of different things. And so that's one of the things. If you're not familiar with the history of it, a lot of LGBTQ families have faced legal repercussions around whether they can keep their families intact because of how our families have been viewed. And so this is the impetus of creating a group like ours so that one, we can support each other if those things happen, but also to create a social environment where our children, LGBTQ, or children of LGBTQ parents can see other families like their own. We also do a lot of social functions because of that, for that very reason. And then there's what we do in the education team, which is we go out to child serving professional agencies, mostly schools, to help them in their mission to be more welcoming and inclusive of LGBTQ issues and families. And so that's where we're at. I'm going to share my screen really, really quickly because with all of our engagements, we want to set precedent on the work that we're doing. And to do that, we want to highlight where we are, where we've been, and where we want to go. And so we're going to do a land acknowledgement. And so our work in San Francisco in the East Bay takes place on unceded Ramaytush Chochenyo Ohlone land. The theft and occupation of this land is part of centuries-long genocide. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the Ohlone people who have been living on and working on this land for centuries. And now an acknowledgement of labor. We acknowledge the unpaid labor of the first 12 generations of Americans of African descent who suffered by the horrors of the Middle Passage, 2.5 centuries of chattel slavery, and another century of de facto segregation and genocide. We're indebted to their labor and acknowledge the multi-generational impact of this violence still felt today. And so if you're wondering why we do that, we are an organization, our Family Coalition is an organization committed to transformational change within our society. And what that means is that in order to create that change that better serves all of us, right? All of us, no matter what our background is, that we need to acknowledge where we have come from, the harms that have come before us, so that we do not repeat them as we go forth and create structures. Okay. I don't think I've introduced myself. My name is Rick Oculto. I'm the education manager at our Family Coalition. I use he, him, and his. I am born and raised here in the Bay Area, down in San Jose to be more specific, but I now live in San Francisco. This is my home, and I'm very, very happy to be able to share this knowledge with you to make our entire home a better place. Joined today by Ann Pinkney, my colleague, who will be running a lot of the things from the background. Ann, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Anne. My pronouns are they, them. I am a programs coordinator at our Family Coalition, and it's really great to be here with you all tonight. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. All right. And then without further ado, I'm going to go down the line for our panelists to introduce themselves. And so I'm going to go from right to left on my screen in no particular order except how it's appearing. And so, Tanya, if you want to start.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. My name is Tanya Moore. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a coordinator 3 from the Los Angeles County Office of Education, where I provide a lot of kind of guidance and support, as well as technical assistance to school districts across LA County in different areas of health education, comprehensive health, physical education, and even adapted physical education. So I'm really grateful to be here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tanya. All right, next up, Jackson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jackson Bowman. Excuse me. I'm the Director of Health Services for Huckleberry Youth Programs. Huckleberry Youth Programs is a San Francisco-based organization that provides a variety of services to youth between the ages of 12 and 24. At the site that I oversee, we have a health education team that provides sexual and reproductive health workshops to middle school and high school students within SFUSD, and also transitional aged youth through our community-based organization partners. And I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Jackson. All right, and then Allison.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Allardyce. I am currently a Master's in Public Health student. I'm finishing up this year. I'm also interning at our Family Coalition under Rick and Ann. So thank you for that. And I am also representing the parents. I have a 9-year-old kiddo who goes to school in Oakland, and we have recently been going through our puberty and sex education experience through the school. So I am happy to share our experience, and I'm happy to share the space with all of you. So thank you for including me.
And thank you all for being here. And so again, we're going to be talking about puberty and sex ed education. And I kind of want to just dive into the questions that we have. And so, you know, this is setting the stage basically, but with regards to puberty and sex ed health in the classroom, what can we expect now in the classroom level with regards to gender expansiveness and LGBTQ inclusion? And to give it like a frame of reference, right? How does that differ from how these topics were addressed in the past? So I'm just going to open the floor.
If I may, I'm going to address this question. I think it's really important to lay the foundation. In California, we are really fortunate to have probably the most comprehensive requirements when it comes to puberty education and comprehensive health education, including sexual health education. We have an Assembly Bill 329, which is also known as California Healthy Youth Act. So specifically to California, we have comprehensive sexual health and HIV prevention instruction that says that all materials and instruction need to be inclusive of LGBTQ individuals, but also we need to provide affirmatively positive examples in the curricula. It is not enough, it's not sufficient enough to provide partner A and partner B or gender neutral names per se, but instead we need to show examples. We need to show pictures of different diverse couples, families, and different ethnicities and cultures and intersectional identities as well. And that is part of the California Healthy Youth Act. So I think California legislation really is laying the foundation that is trickling across the country. And we're really establishing precedents of what it should and could be. So I think that's amazing step and progress for the country. But just keep in mind, according to this piece of legislation, it requires that sexual health education and puberty education be inclusive of all individuals and affirmatively recognize those individuals.
I'm not sure, Tanya, but
Sure.
do you have any information about, well, one, why did AB 329 need to be written, and what was the thought process behind the inclusion of gender and sexual orientation explicitly in the bill?
Right. So we get a lot of questions from community and families. Well, why are we talking about LGBTQ in sex ed? Maybe some concerns about that. And basically, when it comes to gender identity, sexual orientation, and even stereotypes, it really is all under the umbrella of human sexuality and understanding the differences, the nuances, and just how every person has an identity. Every person has a sexual orientation, and that's under the umbrella of human sexuality. So that's what the update to California legislation came to be.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. It falls in line with a lot of the values that the Department of Education has put out there about inclusion, to make sure folks are, like, the information is relevant to them, right?
For sure.
Now, I'm wondering about, the classroom. And so Jackson, you've been doing this work for a minute now, and I have a lot of respect for Huckleberry Youth Programs. Just full disclosure, when I was running youth programs at the DeFrank Center in San Jose, I would refer some folks to the Huckleberry Youth Programs if they've lived further up in the peninsula. And so I'm very familiar with a lot of the work that has been done there. But what does that look like as an educator in the classroom, Jackson? Like, how is this different from how you taught it before? What are things that should be that you've seen are either better now, or you're able to talk to more freely because of these things?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting because it both changes a lot and doesn't change very much, right? So I think it does take a commitment on the part of an educator, whether that's someone from a community-based organization who's coming into a school, or a teacher, to sit and think critically about what has being taught. I think that the biggest challenge with updating things like this, and not just sexual and reproductive health curriculum, but all kinds of things that are rooted and based in a world where, a heterosexual dynamic was the name of the game. And we just didn't have to consider other people, right? The powers that be said, well, we don't really have to do that. And so we haven't really sat down to look at all of the ways that the way we talk about bodies, the way we talk about sexual, acts, the way we talk about relationships exclude LGBT and gender nonconforming people from those conversations. And so it takes a critical and a dedicated eye to look through that and really be like, man, I never really noticed the way that we talk in gendered language about X, Y, or Z. Or I didn't really notice that we are reifying relationship binaries that match a heterosexual dynamic by using these descriptions or these activities or these pictures or these examples. And so I think that it does, I don't want to diminish the work that it takes to make it happen. That being said, I think that there's a lot of fear and a lot of worry that what we're undertaking is like a full, 180 of what we were doing. We're turning the whole thing on its head. Oh my God, there's no stability anymore. What are we doing to the American family, or whatever all of that is? And that when it comes down to it, the instruction, especially around puberty, once we start getting into like relationships and stuff like that, it starts getting a little more squishy. But when we're looking at things like puberty, we're not saying that you have to talk about that like the instruction is the same. It's just how you talk about it, right? So generations of saying, women and mothers and, women's vaginas and women's bodies and men's penises and all of this stuff, it takes effort to make that change. But when you make it, what you realize is that actually what it does is open up the conversation for everybody to be in, right? So one very small change that we have made in our curriculum is talking about people with penises and people with vaginas, right? Like, it's not rocket science. We're not even really getting deep into things around like, people who are intersex and like things like that. Like, we're still keeping it at a pretty, junior level. We're talking to young people, but it's those small changes that say to people in the room, I see you. It's okay that you're here. We expected you to be here. We want you to be here. It's important to us that you're here. We want you to be engaged. That's what you miss when you don't include this kind of language in instruction around sexual and reproductive health.
I think that's a really important point about like not like being able to capture the folks that were missed before in the way that we addressed it in the language that we used. I think a lot of the questions, at least that what I hear from folks, is what's the reaction of the students? Is this confusing to them? Is this something that is too advanced for them? What have you seen as far as the students and how they both approach this now, how they talk about things because of this? What's the outcome?
I mean, the magic of youth is that we are evolutionarily in a place to be able to be exposed to things we've never been exposed to before, to think we know what it is and then learn something different and change our minds. All of that gets much harder as we get older. But for young people, they don't know what came before them, right? Like, I'm a trans person. I have young people in my life who were in my life prior to me transitioning, after me transitioning. They don't care. This is just another experience that they have had where they saw something and learned something and know a person, and that's really all. It's the adults that can't, are having a hard time like making those kinds of, pun intended, transitions, right? So I think when we talk, what young people are doing is they are modeling the behavior that they see from the adults around them. Those are educators, those are parents, those are all kinds of adults, right? And so when we model behavior that opens up these conversations to include everyone, that's not a surprise to young people. It's just another new thing that they're learning, right? And language like a person with a penis is not difficult. It's not theoretical. It's not college level like conversation. It's very straightforward, right? And it builds on information that they have been taught when they were young about bodies and things like that. And so it's never the students that are like, why? It's always the teachers, right? The teachers are like, oh, I'm so inconvenienced by having to learn this new language, or I don't understand why we're doing this, or isn't this just political correctness? And I think yeah, I don't know. I don't want to value judge like people's, response to that. But I would say to your question specifically, Rick, it's young people are 100% on board.
Okay, that's really great. Because I think what you're speaking to as far as the difficulty for adults is that we've had so much longer to ingrain some of these binary messages. And so as we know, it's harder to unlearn something than it is to learn something. And so we've got this dynamic of young people, as you described, who are very open and wanting to accept and really wanting to understand the world around them. And then we have the older people in their lives who didn't have those same messages, and so might have avenues that curve off of the narrative of acceptance and openness, right? Now, I'm curious as a parent, Allison, you've got a 9-year-old. Are there things that are brought home where you're like, oh, what? I didn't know that you knew that word, or how is this on your end?
I'd say for our household, we're very open about all of these topics, about puberty, about sex. We have books laying around. We have always encouraged open conversations. We've always used, penis and vagina to, excuse me, explain body parts, just like an elbow or an eyeball. It was never something that we shied away from. When my kiddo was younger, it was fine, to take him in the shower or to have him be around my body or my husband's body. We were very wanted to have that open space that, your body isn't something you should be shameful of, or this isn't a topic of conversation that you need to hide. And just kind of piggybacking off of a lot of what Jackson said, kids are talking you know, if they're not talking to us, they're talking to each other. And they are inundated with so much sexualization and so much information in movies and commercials. And I mean, you can even just, if you have the news on in the car, you know, they hear anti-trans bills coming up, or, you know, they hear these things. And so if we're not comfortable talking to our kids about it, they're going to talk to each other and come up with all kinds of things. You know, I mean, I can remember from like when I was a kid, the big thing like 40 years ago was like I could get pregnant sitting on a toilet seat, and like the fear, right? Like you were like, oh my God, I can never go to the bathroom because my family didn't talk about it. Nobody talked to us about it. And I just didn't want that, you know, for my kiddo.
Now it's funny because that I remember like those kinds of things floating around, like you can get pregnant off of a toilet or whatever else. Are you finding those same misunderstandings with your kiddo today, and maybe your kiddo's peers? Are those kinds of like assumptions being brought up?
I think the biggest misconception my kiddo has brought home or has asked about is that there's only one way to have a baby, and that was through a penis and a vagina, and heterosexual sex. And so that was interesting. But I also think that came from conversations on the playground. And this is, you know, we're of that age where families are talking to their kids. But that's been kind of the only thing he's brought home so far.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting too, right? Because at least from what I know, curriculum for second grade is supposed to talk about family diversity. And so for somebody who has that understanding, you wonder, what do you think about single parent families? What do you think about two mom or two dad families? You think they just, I don't know, magically appear, right?
The stork brought them.
Right.
Can
Yeah,
I just say something real quick about that, Rick? I think
please.
the thing we have to also remember is that the curriculum is not the only place that these young people are learning this, right? And in fact, it's usually like the smallest instruction that they're getting over like every young person who they're interacting with whose parents aren't doing this for their kids, right? What Allison is doing for her kiddo, to say this is what families look like, right? And so you've got every kid on the playground is telling you this is where babies come from. Then you got one teacher and one kid on the playground who's like, well, that's not what my mom told me, right? So I think having the conversations about curriculum is really important, but it's all also rooted in the culture that we are in, right? So curriculum in school is supposed to be sort of mirroring or supporting the education that young people are getting at home or through other avenues. And when they aren't like when they don't dovetail with each other, that is what creates a confusing situation for young people, because now they're like, you know, they're not quite sure what to do about competing perspectives, and the fact that actually it's all like a little bit not defined quite yet and that kind of thing. That's, I think, where it's a little bit more tricky.
I think that's a really great point, right? Because I mean, both of you made this point brilliantly, that they're talking on the playground, they're talking to each other, and there's just assumptions about things that they might have heard off the cuff. I remember like one of the things for me is like even certain words were taboo, right? Like we're throwing around people with a penis, people with a vagina, and like when I was growing up, right, again like 40 years ago or so, like that, like somebody would say that and you'd immediately turn red. And I'm wondering, you know, that kind of understanding around our hesitancy in our culture today, about talking about bodies or acknowledging body differences. Does that prove as a sort of barrier for discussion for these kinds of things? And if you have those barriers, like what are other barriers that you've encountered with regards to having this more inclusive kind of conversation about puberty and sex ed, right? And like, is there community pushback around it because nobody wants to say penis? Is there teacher and administrator hesitancy because you've got say a teacher that was assigned to be the puberty teacher and they're like, I just wanted to teach PE, right? Do you have just general disinformation where like these stories about, well, did you know that you can get an STD or you can get pregnant by doing X, Y, or Z thing? And so, shh, you know, like, don't talk about it. Or do you experience these barriers? What do they look like?
Rick, I'm really glad you're asking this question because from the school side of it, it's fear, it's misinformation big time. So I mean, this piece of legislation is extremely detailed, right? What we can and can't teach, what we should and how we should teach it. And Jackson kind of touched based about how we should teach it, right? We have to be inclusive, but some of the big barriers are community members. We have protesters from other states. We have protesters from people that don't even have children across the state. And this is what they do full time to try to really have that conversation with families and school boards. So there is a lot of fear of community pushback. Even if an administrator or an educator agrees that this is what's best for education or what's best for health and well-being, the pushback and that fear of pushback, because this is so quote unquote hot topic, if you will, and somewhat politicized, a lot politicized. There's been lots of media coverage, for example. So school districts, school boards are fearful of it. And what's really unfortunate is sometimes the pushback from community members are targeting where families where English is not their primary language. I've been in many instances where postcards are mailed out or handed out at churches, at community centers, and so on. So those information cards are printed with pictures of curricula we don't even use, or misinformation, or quotes that look really, really credible. So credibility and valid resources are a huge barrier, and that from a health educator standpoint is really sad because it's part of our health standards. It's part of our skills is accessing valid information, right? So because health education is not a required class, sometimes, like Rick said, we have the science teacher teaching it, the PE teacher, history, social science teachers teach this sometimes. Even a physics teacher I have seen teach this. So it's twofold. It becomes where they're not probably the best equipped for teaching this subject, A, or B, they are feeling that they have to do it. So they may have a little bit of a push and pull teaching this content, whether it's puberty education, whether it's middle school or high school. Sometimes we have educators who are not wanting to be there. And that is, to me, a really big barrier, and it's concerning. So just to kind of bring it back, we have a lot of barriers, but I think we are progressing and making those steps forward for sure. We need health education as a mandate. That would make big changes and make sure that we have qualified individuals teaching this content. And the misinformation that is out there is really concerning for sure. Definitely a barrier.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like, this misinformation is one that pervades in a lot of different spaces, but it also sounds like because again, I think you hit it on the head that there's a lot of fear because of how we talk about bodies, how we talk about relationships, that there is also a somewhat of a practice to try and use that misinformation to then further exploit somebody's misunderstanding around it, right? Whether that is a language barrier, whether that is a barrier of not being able to access the actual content that's being shared, or misrepresentation of how the content's being used. And it's rather unfortunate, because I know for a fact that once those things are translated, many communities they're like, oh, that's all you're talking about? Well, yes,
Right.
we have these body parts. Why
Right.
wouldn't you talk about that, right? And so I think that's a really strong point to put out there, that the both the fear coupled with the misinformation, coupled with this barrier for communication, depending on what community is being exploited, creates this vacuum of knowledge that gets to be filled by something, right?
Sure.
That can be harmful.
Right. That's a really good point. And a lot of times families and parents and community members, we do presentations to educate these families and parents. And my favorite question we hear all the time is, show me the videos, show me the pictures. And I press play. No, show me the pictures and the videos. I don't have any other. This is it. And so that misinformation out there, they think it's the just say no era, the scare tactics, where there are sexually transmitted infections on penises and vaginas and body parts. And they think it's sex ed from the 80s and beforehand. So that's a lot of misinformation for sure.
Right. And the irony is, the value that we want to put out there is we want to equip our young people with the right vocabulary and the right information so they can talk to us as adults,
right,
about what's happening, right?
Right.
And I'm curious now, as a parent, Allison, how does that land on you, knowing that this misinformation is out there? How do you combat it as a parent?
Yeah, when I was thinking about kind of the barriers that we ran into, it has a lot to do with, I think, what Jackson said earlier about just administration not critically thinking through the curriculum. That was kind of our barrier, is that it was a facilitator that they had a relationship with for years. It was a curriculum that they had used over and over again. And nobody questioned it. Nobody had opted out from it. So it was just really interesting that, this is what they were comfortable with, regardless of the misinformation. Speaking of like the advancement and the misinformation, it was just something that, we've done this, we're comfortable, don't fix what's not broken. We just need to check it off, because everyone does have such anxiety about these topics. And so we just want to get it done. And it was similar with some of the families, right? The curriculum was presented to us, and some of the families were like, that's great. And it was taking us talking to fellow families about how gendered the language was and how narrow the scope was and how much misinformation was in that they were like, oh, you're right, because that was what they know. They only know like a small amount, or have been educated in a certain way about it. And so a lot of this misinformation is just, us as adults not evolving with the information that's happening.
I see you unmuted, Jackson. I'm
I mean,
sensing.
I was like, yes. I mean, I really feel like, to Tanya's point, right? Like that scary curriculum that they think is happening is the curriculum that they got, right? We haven't actually been doing this very well for very long, right? So a lot of us, there was somebody, Avi, in the chat was like, woof, this I experienced in high school and it was wild. I can't believe this person was talking about menstruation in this way. Like we've a lot of us have had poor instruction around sexual and reproductive health. We don't feel like we have the tools to talk about it. We're uncomfortable with talking about it. We don't really want to engage in it because it's wild and we don't understand it. And so that feeds that fear, right? That fear of the teacher knows things that I don't know. They're teaching my kids things that I'm not going to know, that they're going to know, and that makes me feel weird. I think we all know, we're coming from a different perspectives, but we all know how important it is to teach children, to bring children up in the way that you want them to exist in the world, right? And so we're saying that's really important to us. We want to bring them up in a way where they exist in a world of gender expansiveness, of inclusion, of change, of variety, of flexibility, of magic, like all of these pieces. And I think that from the other side, they want kids to grow up in a certain way, and it's not necessarily that. And so we're battling over our children, but we're also battling over our future, right? Like, do we want to live in a world that's different than the one that we grew up in, or do we not? And I think, for young people, change is part of life, right? As you are growing up, the whole world is changing. You're learning things you didn't know every day. And at some point, we graduate into this place where we don't want the world to change anymore. It makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes us feel powerless. It makes us feel unprepared, confused. We're not really good at being like, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm comfortable with that, right? We're not great at that. And so it's like pumping the brakes on change so that you can continue to exist in a world that was created for you, instead of being willing to live in a world that is changing. And so I think that, I don't know. That's one piece that I wanted to say. And then the other thing I wanted to say, though, is about the instruction in schools and who's doing it. I really think that, it makes all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world when you have an educator who is bought into what is being taught, who understands it from a critical and deep place, who is invested in the change that you are trying to put into the classroom. And the flip side, it does a lot of damage when you hand progressive curriculum to a person who is not bought into it and who feels like their job is to low-key like undermine what the instruction has been, because they're not that they don't want to see that change, right? And I'm not saying all teachers, certainly, and I'm not even saying most teachers, but we do a disservice by not having structural support for this kind of thing. Health education is somehow considered like a nice to have and not a need to have. And so we don't, high schools have to have health education, but middle schools don't. Surprise, these kids need this in middle school. And if you hand this to the health, the science teacher or the PE teacher, you might get a science teacher or a PE teacher who's like totally down and is like ready to have these conversations. And you might not. And I think that it does take some skill, and it does take some knack, and it takes some interest to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations about being the adult in the room who's willing to say penis to a classroom of snickering kids and being like, that's cool. This is my role. My role is to bring you this information. Your role is to feel a little bit weird about it because you're learning, and for us to just sit in that discomfort and be here together, right? But sometimes adults don't want to do that. And it makes it really challenging to have the change happen, but not when you don't have everybody bought into it. You can end up working against yourself.
Yeah, and if I
go
could
ahead.
add something just to piggyback off of that, because the facilitator that we originally met with was very uncomfortable with gender identity and talking about babies coming from any other place than heterosexual sex. And it was obvious in just her language, not only in just the curriculum that she presented, but when asked questions about, gender on a spectrum, she visually got very uncomfortable. And when we talked to the school about that, they had asked, is it the curriculum or is it the curriculum and the facilitator? And we were like, both. You can't give this facilitator new curriculum. It's still going to be harmful. And how it's being presented, kids pick up on that tension and trying to choke out words. And then, if you do have a gender expansive kiddo in the class, then they're going to feel shameful or wrong, like this person who it's their job to educate can't even do that. And then what message does it send to all the kids in the class, right? It's harmful for everybody in that room. So it is really, important that the facilitators or the teachers are very comfortable with the language and how they're presenting it.
If I can add something to that, Allison said something that just is reminding me. I think what Allison and Jackson, what you both are saying is really critical, and we need to take it even to the next level. This isn't just for our gender expansive students, because we have cisgender kiddos who have trans parents or diverse parents or gender expansive or all across or intersectional identities. That's also, or a best friend, and so if I'm a middle school cisgender white male and my best friend is a trans Black woman or girl, I don't want to feel ashamed because that's my best friend. So at what point is it okay to protect, stand up, and whatnot? So I think it goes beyond an LGBTQ community. I just think it back to the umbrella of human sexuality, but just acceptance, I think is really important.
And to Tanya's point, I think that, when we create a world that is accepting and inclusive of our gender nonconforming young people, we create a world that is accepting and inclusive for all of our young people, right? There was when the ADA was coming and they were talking about putting ramps on sidewalks, people lost it. Right. I can't. Oh my God, we're restructuring the whole world for these people. Blah, 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 blah. Right. This whole thing. Turns out we all benefit from ramps. People with shopping carts, people with strollers, people with bicycles, people with, everybody. Everybody loves the ramps. They are critical. Right. When I go to places where I feel like they are not there, I was like, oh my God, these people, they haven't even put in ramps here. So what we have to remember is that this isn't just about our LGBT youth. It's about all young people. And it's about creating safety and inclusion and visibility for every young person, right? I think not talking about the experience of gender nonconforming and LGBT youth is tantamount to creating a world where we're not allowed to exist in public. Right? We're allowed to exist, but no one wants to talk to us. No one wants to talk about us. No one wants to talk near us, right? So creating a world where we are all allowed to be in public, visibly ourselves, I think is critical, and it is critical for gender conforming people as well.
Right. Yeah. Y'all touched on some really, really rich topics here. And like when I do presentations about gender, this is one of the topics that I like to hit home, which is, is there any point in your life where you cut yourself off from doing something because it just wasn't expected for your gender? Right? Did you stop yourself from singing? Did you stop yourself from playing football? Did you stop yourself from hanging out with this other person who's a different gender from you? Did that happen? And how did that feel? When we talk about it's not just about trans or gender expansive youth, this is what we're talking about. Gender, gender hegemony, right? Those boxes that we put ourselves in really limit human experience to a point where it is harmful to how we can evolve to really care for one another. And so I think you really hit it on the head around why this is important. We're not talking about a specific community. We're talking about every single one of us. Now, when I think Jackson, you hit on this earlier about the fear, and Allison, you followed up with, you know, when somebody is not comfortable with the material, the way that they're going to deliver it is not going to be one that is helpful for folks. And I wonder, you know, if a part of that is, if you talk about something as an adult to a young person, now you're responsible for it. And if I am not myself sure about how to address this, or how I feel about this, or what the science is behind it, then I can't be responsible for it. So I have to hide it. I have to put it away. Right. And I feel that's something that exists within the atmosphere with this particular subject. And no, we talked, you know, we've talked a bit about the barriers and what might be the motivations behind some of these barriers. I want to give folks who are here watching this panel some ideas now. What are some strategies that you have found that can be helpful to sidestep, overcome, destroy these barriers to better conversation about health with regards to puberty and sex education?
This might be sort of a complicated example, but I'm trying to think about the best way of talking about it. We have structurally under-resourced schools in general, right? Teachers, administrators, basically everybody involved in the situation is stretched beyond their capacity. And so it's a little complicated what I'm going to suggest, but if we know that it is damaging to young people to have good instruction by people who are not bought into it, then one kind of simple change is to make sure that the people who are teaching these lessons are bought into that curriculum and have the expertise to have these conversations. And so if it's not our school teachers, you know, for us, for Huckleberry, we get calls from teachers. They say, please, 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 can you please come to my classroom? And honestly, they're not asking us to come there because, I mean, some of them are. Some of them are coming because they're like, oh, your presentations are great. We love the way you talk about this. And a lot of them are like, I would love to have a guest speaker so I can do some correcting of my papers in the back and I don't have to do a lesson plan for today, right? And so it's a little bit like, leverage the under-resourcedness of schools by bringing in people or providers outside of those systems that are experts and providing more resources for the school, and not forcing teachers who are not bought into this. I mean, the teacher who's not good at talking about gender might be great at talking about science. So I don't want to be like, throw the baby out with the bathwater because you're not good at doing this thing, right? Like, lots of people are not good at or interested in having these conversations with young people. And so if you bring in folks who do want to have these conversations and are good at having them, the result you're going to get is so much better. And so reaching out to organizations, having teachers and schools partner with organizations that can provide the expertise that the schools don't have, I think is a way of bringing some extra kind of resource into the situation.
To echo kind of what Jackson is suggesting, for me, my approach in Los Angeles County, we have 80 school districts. So we really were trying to be strategic on how to handle this. First and foremost, I actually present to community members and families maybe a little bit differently. I acknowledge personal values and beliefs, whether I agree or disagree. As an educator, our job is to adhere to the law. Number one. Number two, we are to teach medically accurate, age appropriate, unbiased, comprehensive sexual health education that is in alignment to legislation, period. Our job as educators is not to provide personal values, personal opinions. We can't do that. It's in legislation. We cannot do that. So I really work hard in educating parents and families and community members about legislation of what we truly are teaching. And for many, they're like, oh, okay, I support this. I don't support what was on those 3x5 cards that showed up in my mailbox. That is part. So a big piece, it's a lot of work. We need to correct that misinformation. And that is a big strategy. We need to educate parents and families, cousins and aunties and everybody in between what is truly happening. My message to all families is this is a partnership. If we're truly going to do this, we provide, ideally, sexual health education, puberty education starts in the home, right? But if it doesn't, we at the schools are providing information that is age appropriate, medically accurate, unbiased. That is in alignment to legislation. That is the goal. Families, synagogues, friends, they're the ones that are really kind of having that conversation about values. That's where they're gathering their information from their peers, from social media. It doesn't mean it's all wonderful and positive, but that's where they're gaining it. So with proper education in the schools, we're educating students how to communicate with their trusted adult, talk to their healthcare providers, to their trusted adult, their families, and so on. So to me, that's a big strategy. The last thing really important is to say, hey, everybody has different beliefs and values and whatnot, but we're really, really here to make students, provide them with knowledge and skills on how to make decisions about their own health and well-being, not in 5th and 6th grade, not in middle school, not in high school, but for the rest of their lives. And that's truly why we shy away from scare tactics. Or abstinence only, or just say no, but instead, like, hey, how do you have bodily autonomy and make decisions for your own health and well-being? Those are my strategies.
It's great. Yeah, I think a lot of times that we forget that we teach puberty and sex education not because we want to, but it's a public health issue, right? The more information that we have, as you so eloquently put, Tanya, the better decisions that we can make about our own bodies, around our own autonomy, about how we talk about how to be safe in a situation and how we can assert that. And so I think that's often lost in the conversation, because it's always like, well, you're talking about body parts. And I'm like, yes, because as everybody has pointed out, young people can be exploited around their body parts. They need to have the language and the tools to protect themselves when they're in compromising situations. It's a public health issue.
Public health and social justice, right? I
Yes.
mean, marginalized individuals, we have just so many marginalized groups. And when we look at the data, that's another strategy. Data should be driving our education and prevention efforts, period, when it comes to health, right? And well-being. We have LGBTQ youth. I think we know the data behind mental health, suicide ideation, right? And death by suicide. Those have always been really high, and they're getting, the numbers are getting worse, right? And they're getting worse younger. That, to me, that until it's zero, we're not there. So I think data is another driving point. I've worked with in South Central LA, and I've had a father who took a train and a taxi to get to a parent preview night and had working hands, what appeared as working hands. And I gave my spiel about sex ed, and he raised his hand at the end and said, "Hey, I'm a Latino dad. My daughter, this is against our culture." He saw our data and he goes, "So I have to trust that this is the right decision for my daughter." So here we are. So we have to understand that we have different cultures and values, and that's an asset. It's awesome. And it's a really cool thing to do, but we need to make sure we can get through those barriers.
And I think that's really great that you brought that up. The shared value is that we value our kids. We value their safety. And this is one of the best ways to provide that safety. And I am wondering, you know, as a parent, Allison, to overcome these kinds of barriers, what are things that you see that you can do from the parent's perspective, either to your peers that are other families, or, you know, toward schools and teachers and administrations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, you know, for our experience, we felt really lucky. The school did present the curriculum to us and allowed us an opportunity to meet the facilitator. If that's not an option, as parents, we do have the right to ask the school for a copy of the curriculum and to read through it. That alone raised a lot of red flags for us, and then meeting the facilitator then raised additional flags. Once we had read through the curriculum, you know, we asked for a individual meeting with administration right off the bat. This was before we even met the facilitator. And then once we met the facilitator, you know, brought in some additional examples to our concerns and just presented, you know, here's the national sex ed guidelines. These are the standards. Here's gender spectrums guidelines. And just presented a lot of just concrete information and said, you know, you're not really in alliance with what the standards are. We're not teaching the kids the standards. And then we took that conversation to other families. And I think it's just really important for parents to talk to parents. I mean, yeah, this is a awkward, anxiety producing conversation, but you know, it is for our kids, and we just have to recognize everyone feels awkward talking about it. So, you know, we could just all be awkward together. And so we started talking to other families, and I would say 99.9% of them were completely on board and were like, oh, you know, we didn't even think of that. We'll send an email expressing our concern. We'll reach out to administration expressing our concern. We'll opt out if you want to opt out, and so your kiddo's not, you know, sitting in a room by himself. So I think it just goes back to that we're not really critically thinking through what we're presenting and what we're talking about. And if we start having more conversations at whatever level your school climate allows, whether it's with the parents or the teacher or the administration or the district, to make sure that we're providing inclusive curriculum with a facilitator that's comfortable doing that. That's, you know, and then make sure that we can start, you know, dedicating resources to that.
It's so funny because as you talk, Allison, I'm like, oh my gosh, we really just said, get the information and talk to each other. like imagine that the counter to ignorance is knowledge and sharing that knowledge. And to that point, you know, Tanya earlier was talking about you know, having the data around the effectiveness about stuff. The adolescent sexual health work group for California, they've done a really good job at collecting data on the curriculum as after the California Healthy Youth Act, and how successful it's been with regards to student outcomes. And so if people are interested in that data, because again, knowledge is power, then you can find it over the website that I just linked. Tanya, make sure that Charla knows I shared her stuff. In any case, but we've spoken extensively about ways to advocate at the school level, and in some cases in other levels. I am concerned, right? Because these conversations about what is appropriate and not appropriate in the classroom extends beyond just sexual health. It's happened in history, it's happened in social sciences, it's happened in lots of different subjects. But I'm wondering then, for communities that are less receptive to inclusion of diversity, or who are steeped in wanting to keep things the way that they are so that they don't need to, again, be responsible for knowing new stuff, because it is hard, right? This is why we have the entire profession of education in the first place, because learning and teaching is hard. What would you say to people in those communities? What are some ways that they in those more difficult spots can advocate for better curriculum, better representation?
This is an interesting question. So I grew up in Central California, a migrant community farm town in Central California. Went to college, undergrad in Northern California, and my career's been in Los Angeles County. So I've lived several places across California, and I really do think this is a systemic issue and a systemic conversation. I'm fortunate enough, we have cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland, San Diego. The bigger cities have LGBTQ centers, have resources for youth, for educators, and so on. We have all these awesome resources like Jackson, Huckleberry, like would be amazing. I'm not confident that they have that in Tulare County or in Mono County. So what's really important is that we're reaching the far ends of California and everywhere in between, and we're meeting the needs of all individuals and educating them, informing them. And if anything we've learned in the pandemic is we can increase our reach through Zoom, through Teams, whatever platform we're using, but we need to sing from our mountaintops and make sure that we're informing and educating big time. Big time. Number 2, allyship is critical. We have to find youth advocacy. They're the leaders. On a school site, if you want to make change, you go to youth. They're going to make change. It's not the adults on campus. It is peer-to-peer relationships that are stronger, and the data states that, right? If you look at the California Healthy Kids Survey, school connectedness is terrible. 33% is terrible, in my opinion. That high school kids feel highly connected to a staff on campus. From my era, we had the physical bullying from peer to peer, that was high. Now it's saying, I don't feel comfortable with staff. That's unacceptable as an educator. So we need to make sure that we're supporting those adult allies on campus. We're supporting the youth allies on campus, and we're giving them the space, the grace, and the resources to really make change. Because I wholeheartedly believe this generation, and I understand I sound super old right now, but with this generation, advocacy is huge, but also identity. So we need to reach out to our youth and empower them.
I think that's a really good point, and that youth are always hopefully. I'm hoping that adults are seeing that the youth should lead the way in a lot of things because it's their world in essence, but also the fact that in a lot of spaces where they aren't finding the information that they desperately want. They don't want to have hearsay. They don't want to, have Billy's uncle's take on whatever be the truth, because they know there's something more. That to provide them those resources, that it's not something that adults have to lift by themselves or even for them. I mean, we should help, right? But to listen to them when they say we have real legitimate questions, and then give them the avenues to be able to explore that. I think youth in their own liberation are often underutilized because we want to protect them, and that's a good instinct. By no means do we not want to protect them, but we also want them to have to learn how to be able to think and to analyze and to process, so that in our absence they can still make good decisions. Jackson, I know you've been waiting.
Oh, well, I mean, I just want to say I've been super encouraged by Allison. Even when we were, having our planning meeting, talking about conversations that you had with other parents who, if you hadn't come and talked to them, it wouldn't have occurred to them because it doesn't impact or they think it doesn't impact their kid. So they're like, that's just not on their radar. But a parent who they have a relationship with, a young person that their kids have relationships with, someone that they feel in community with and who they respect, is like, hey, my kid's having a hard time in school. It would be great if this could happen. And they were like, that's awesome. We would love to support you and your family and your kiddo in making this happen. And I think that, I mean, I don't want to get too overly Harvey Milk about it, but I do think that it really makes a difference when people know us and they see us. And by us, I mean not just queer and trans people. I mean the people who love us, the people who have raised us, the people who support us and care for us, right? So, I grew up in Wisconsin. My parents were evangelical Christians, not down for a trans kid. And it took a long time for our relationship to get repaired. But one of the things that has been so interesting to me is that even though my brothers and my dad, they're really conservative, politically very, very conservative, they are not down for really anything. We are not on the same page. They'll go to bat for me. It's like I'm the one exception. It's like they think gay marriage is fine. They think everything else is garbage, but because they know me and they love me and they want me to be happy and healthy, they can see how these issues that if I wasn't part of their family, they would just think that, well, that's not for me, or I don't care about that, or I only want to be in opposition to it. But once they start to see that it does impact real people who have real lives and who need real safety and real education, then it does make a difference, right? So I'm their one liberal thing. They support queer people. Immigrants, no, but queer people, right? So I think it does make a difference to be visible and to say we are people that you know and love. We are people who deserve good education. We are students who fall under the same legislative guidelines that says every student needs to be able to receive instruction. We are those students too. So if people build those personal relationships, I think it does make a difference. I don't want to be, overly Pollyanna-ish about it. I know not everybody can or wants to come out, and that's really complicated, and people should live the lives that they're comfortable with. But I'm just so love what I see Allison doing with her kiddo and the difference that it has made in their community to just bring a couple more families to the table. Because it could just be Allison and her partner and her kid, on this path being like, not over my dead body. But it really helps to have those allies, those other parents who are like, I agree. I think that was also a good idea. So building those connections, I think is, does help, I think, with creating some of the structural change that we want to see.
Yeah, I would, I can't impress upon parents enough how important it is that we talk to each other. And with us talking to each other, that person will then talk to somebody else and somebody else. And this is how we can start addressing this misinformation. I mean, there was a board meeting not too long ago where a parent was upset that we're teaching sex to second graders, right? Like, this is the information that's being put out there. And then all of a sudden, their anxiety, their fear is up. And then, just having a conversation and being like, oh, really? I thought we were just talking about family diversity in second grade. I thought we were just doing this. And because they know you, because there's a relationship there, there's not this hostility, there's already an in. But having these gentle conversations with people and saying, really? Because I thought this, or my understanding was this. So we're not aggressively engaging in these like conversations. It's just like, really? Do you have that right? Let's talk about it.
I think it's funny, Allison, you bring that up, because that's one of my favorite conversations on Nextdoor app, is, are we teaching anal sex in kindergarten, first, second grade? And that's where they use the legislation to contort and twist and manipulate. So 51934 says how we need to teach for all grade levels, right? 51935 says what we need to teach in middle school and high school. So because we're teaching risk reduction from risky behaviors or whatnot in middle school and high school, or contraceptives in middle school and high school, they switched it, saying, well, see, according to that, you're teaching all of that in kindergarten through sixth grade, which is completely a farce. So that manipulation of the law is kind of fun to entertain sometimes.
Yeah. And to your point, this is exactly what we're hopefully teaching our kids, to question, to inquire, to really have a curiosity about the things that they're told, so that they just don't, tacitly accept, that they can really think through, why are things the way that they are? Why are things operating the way that we see them operating? And is there a better way? Right? Because that's literally how evolution in a social setting works. We have to have those conversations. Speaking of youth, though, and I think, Tanya, you touched on this earlier. We've talked a lot about what us as not the students can do. And so this is like a twofold question here, which is one, what are some things that students can do to get better education around puberty and sex? And on the other side of that, what can we as adults do to support those students? I know money is going to obviously be like, okay, yes, money, so we can have the resources so they get the right information. But beyond that, what are y'all seeing?
When it comes to I hate to say it, but I don't think money is the barrier to teaching high quality puberty education or comprehensive sexual health education. In my opinion, from what I'm seeing, because the curricula is not that expensive compared to STEM programs. I mean, we're talking millions versus thousands, right? So typically what I see, that's not the barrier. So I think, what can kids do? What can youth do? They need to speak up. I have 3 schools in LA County right now where the students have literally overturned. We're not accepting this curriculum and the way it's being taught because it's not inclusive. And so knowledge is power, number 1. Number 2, youth, they have the power And I think we need to allow them those civic engagement, those civic inquiry, right? And getting involved, community involvement, advocacy is huge. I can't say that enough, and giving them that space to do so, I think is really critical. That's the one thing that I would stress for students.
Jackson, Allison. Oh, okay.
I mean, it's like, I feel the same. It's really true, right? Like, I do think students are more powerful in these situations than maybe they think. I think that their opinions really do matter. I think that, you know, I'm very much in the camp of like, the kids are all right. You know what I mean? Like, love the young people that I get to meet and that I work with. I love the way that they see the world. They are demanding a world different than the one that we have created for them. Environmentally, politically, socially, all of these things, they are not having it with us, which I think is great. I think my only sort of like, it's not a critique, but like my only fear is that it's again sort of like we put the responsibility on those who are impacted instead of putting the responsibility on like the systems, right? So I think that not all young people are in a position where it's safe enough to be able to, you know, agitate, where they are supported enough at home to be able to agitate, where they have enough of a community of other, you know, students to feel that they want to put their necks out there. There are some really great young people who are willing to take those risks. But there's a lot of young people who can't, and that they're really just trying to get through the day. So I think that, you know, there are a lot of people who have the ability to provide, you know, science-based, unbiased sexual and reproductive health information to young people, and they're not at schools. But they are in community-based organizations, they are in churches, they are in families, they are in doctors' offices, they are in therapy, right? Like, so those are all adults that these young people are learning from. These are all young adults where they can get the information that they're not able to get in school. They're able to get the validation that they're not able to get in school, not in all schools, but in some schools, right? So I think for young people, if it seems like, you know, such a mountain to try to take on a school district, and that is just like not in somebody's, you know, wheelhouse, I think leveraging the community resources, I think, can be really, really critical to supporting youth and families.
Awesome. Allison, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so I agree completely. You know, it shouldn't be on the shoulders of our kiddos to right all of our wrongs. And it's also really important that we know our kid and what our kid is capable of. So, you know, for our experience, my kiddo was ready to raise a resistance. He found out nobody had ever opted out, and he was like, well, I'm going to be the first one. I'm going to send this message. And his friends decided to do that with him. And so he was going to, he called it, I'm going to form my resistance and send a message. And he also knows that his family supports him and he's in a safe space right now. And not everybody has that. And so it is really important to know, are you in a safe space? For one, we always want to keep the kids safe, know your kid and what risks they might be willing to take. We did present all the options. We said, this is what it's going to look like if you opt out or want something different. This is the option if you sit in. And if you decide to sit in, then we talked about the narrow views that were going to be presented. And this is your opportunity to learn what is being said on the other side. So you can then speak about why this is incorrect and that you have a foundation to speak to why this is misinformation. So we can come back and say, well, no, that's not really true. Instead of not feeling like, being caught off guard or having that person say, well, in second grade, they're teaching my kid how to have sex, that you can address these. And so those were kind of the things that we laid out. And, we just feel really lucky because the school did decide to postpone the education, reevaluate the curriculum. And I just found out today they decided to bring in a new facilitator. So we feel like, we were heard so far. But it's really important, the school climate, your kid, and where you can step in.
That's really great. And I think it can't be underscored enough, like supporting your kid and letting them know that the values they share about what they want to learn about the world is important and should be spoken. My niece is the same age as your kiddo, Allison, and she's notorious for being the one who's like, you don't know if that's a boy or a girl. You should check with their pronouns first, or you should whatever else. Even like, even to me, where I'm like, I taught you that, but just to know that, and this is something that I've been teaching for 20 years now, which is, if a young person knows that the heart of their support is at home, they're fearless. They can do anything, right? They can conquer the world. They can heal the world. And so this is, it's essential to how we have faith in our youth, and how we bring them to into their own power, really. And so I know we have about 5 minutes left for the plan portion of this. And so I want to know, because you are all such wealths of information, what resources are there out there? I know I shared Ashwig earlier about like data. What are books? I know somebody earlier asked about what books can you recommend, what websites, what organizations, what do people have that they can reach out to if they need this stuff?
If I may, I can put it in the chat. The California Department of Education recently vetted resources that are regional, which I think is just so important. And these are resources for families and communities organized by region. Critical, awesome, fabulous. And they looked, if it's LGBTQ in the state of California, it is on this list. 100%. And then also there are additional resources for schools and education entities. So I'll put that in the chat if that's able to be shared.
Yes, please share everything. Awesome. Allison Jackson, what you got?
Yeah, I was just pulling up a book that we have recently been looking at. It's called the Everybody Book, and it's an LGBTQ inclusive guide for kids about sex and gender. The language is all inclusive. The drawings are all inclusive. So I was just pulling that up to put in the chat. And then the other book that's kind of fun that just hangs out around our house is Sex is a Funny Word. I think, Anne, you put in the chat another book by the author. I haven't read that one yet, but we like Sex is a Funny Word by Corey as well. So I'll put that in there.
So the health education work that we're do is really focused on like middle school and high school age. So a lot of the resources in my mind are like, oh, Scarlettine is amazing, and Bedsider is amazing, but that's not appropriate maybe for all ages. And I don't have like young people in my life where I'm like, oh, you should, read this book. I think from like if you are a parent or an educator and you would like a curriculum, or you want to suggest a curriculum to a school district that is positive, Advocates for Youth has a great curriculum that is really, really comprehensive. They have curriculum that spans the age range, And it also incorporates elements of reproductive justice so that we're having conversations about race and the impacts that sort of sexual and reproductive health education and the systems that surround that have impacted communities of color. And so that those are brought into those conversations and not sort of like, oh, and then for the brown kids, we'll talk about that somewhere else, right? Like these are conversations for us all to be having. And so I recommend that as a curriculum if you're hoping to storm the castle of your local school district.
I love it. I love all of these resources. Tanya, I see that you put welcoming schools in there. I just want to say I did not tell Tanya to do that. I am one of California's trainers for welcoming schools, so you'll probably talk to me if you're using that. But they have some really great resources on there that do not require training: book lists, lesson plans, ways to talk to your kid, videos, just really, really great stuff. All right. Are there any events or any things that you want to share about Huckleberry, about LACO, about the California Department of Education? What's coming up for you that folks can interact with you?
This is a pretty cool thing. In California, there was some legislation signed that was a couple of different intersecting pieces of local California legislation. Basically, ultimately, there were about a few dollars set aside to help educate teachers and administrators in the state of California to be more culturally competent when it comes to LGBTQ youth. Also talking about foster youth, intersectional identities, talking about suicide prevention and education, mental health, all the different components. There are 12 pieces that must be covered, but this is something that LACO will be working on with all the 20 organizations across the country, actually, and we'll be developing training modules that will be free throughout the next 2 years, and they will be available. So the idea, the desired outcome is to increase cultural competency for educators and administrators to really support those kiddos in class.
All right. Thank you so much, Tanya. That is great news. Is there stuff at Huckleberry, Jackson?
I mean, this is entirely self-serving, but
Supposed to
it is
be.
the 30th anniversary of Huckleberry's health services in both San Francisco and Marin counties. And so we have a year's worth of events and opportunities for folks to support Huckleberry and the work we do. So if you are interested and would like to talk with us, to join us for an event, please check out our website, huckleberryyouth.org. And you can find information about all the ways that we're going to be celebrating health services for adolescents this year.
That is beautiful. Thank you. Allison, I know you're with us at OFC a lot of time, but is there anything that you want to plug? Okay. If not, all good. I really, really want to give my heartfelt appreciation for all of you for really sharing your expertise tonight. It was eye-opening for me in a lot of different ways, and I'm hoping that the folks on this call are also getting a lot of information here. It will be available. We're recording it, so it will be available for use later. You can share it with other folks who need this information. And again, I think a large part of the reason that we do this work is because we really care about the future. We really care about our kids, and we really care about how the information that they get in order to shape that better future for themselves. They're faced with so many different things that at least I did not face when I was growing up, with regards to conversations about gender, about race, about war, about pandemic and disease, about all of these different things that have come to a head recently, and the will and the desire to make sure that they have the tools necessary, not only to navigate those difficult situations, but to overcome and make this a better place is just invaluable to me. This is exactly why I do the work I do. And I am so grateful to have you in my sphere as colleagues, in my sphere as people that I can ask information and advice from, and to share, to be generous enough to share with our community. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. All right. And with